Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Dwarven Discussions podcast. My name's Kelly.
My name is Tana. We have a guest here who may or may not speak up.
Haro, name's Velison.
I like how our first episode we have a guest, so we're moving up in the world already.
Hey, he's over. Mine as well.
True, true. Anyway, the Dwarven Discussions podcast is an idea that stemmed off of our thoughts video we did on the Elder Scrolls Online, and the idea stemmed to create a podcast about fantasy video game discussion, not even just video game discussion, really anything nerd. Dungeons and Dragons, EverQuest, Elder Scrolls, World of Warcraft, such and the like. So this is really our launch test, whatever you want to see it as, video. And as of right now, we are just winging it. So uh, we're going to do some introductions. I'll start with Tana. If you'd like to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background about what it is you've experienced in the gaming world and such and so forth.
Not a problem. Alright, my name is Tana, as stated before. I've been working with computers basically my entire life, and I have been in so many game betas, I don't even want to count the numbers. Over 200, I can tell you that, though. Um, my first beta I was ever in was with EverQuest, the original one. And that was technically my sister's account, but she let me play it and it got me hooked right then and there. Um, and then I've been playing MMOs and video games ever since. I have, I think, 6 active MMO subscriptions right now. And I wonder how many games are in my Steam library right now. Probably 439. So I've gotten around the gaming, you know.
Wait, how do you count Steam games? Because I'm interested now.
Just mouse over the library button, and it tells you all games 439.
Wow, you dwarf me. Haha, I get it, joke. Dwarven discussions.
Nice. Very nice. Alright, what about you?
Me or Vel?
You.
Oh yeah, he's a guest. Well, honestly, my gaming started from a very early age. As a kid, my mom introduced me to gaming through the NES, and we play Super Mario Brothers. It wasn't that I really got into like hardcore gaming until Diablo 2, which I had a friend at the time who showed me Diablo and StarCraft, and I was just blown away because I was so used to like Super Nintendo games, Sega Genesis games, NES games, and seeing something as complex as Diablo comparatively to what I'd been playing was mind blowing to me. Like I really enjoyed RPGs, and seeing the dungeon crawler type games was just amazing. So I started playing Diablo. I played that for several years, and when I found out about EverQuest, like the first thing I thought was, "Oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing ever." It's an MMO. You've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people literally playing simultaneously in a persistent world together. And I was just like, "Wow, that's amazing." So I tried to get into EverQuest, but my computer was just nowhere near what the original EverQuest required, which is kind of mind blowing. But so because I didn't have that, I was like really bummed out. I didn't get to do MMOs. Uh, about 6 months, a year later, they came out with EverQuest Online Adventures for the PlayStation 2, which was my first taste at MMO. And I'm gonna say it's nostalgia. I'm not even gonna deny it, but that has to be my favorite MMO that I've ever played. It was my first MMO experience. I've made a lot of friends, which unfortunately, we never really kept in touch. And of course, the game is no longer up. It closed down in February of 2012, I want to say. Uh, but I played EverQuest Online Adventures for several months. I think actually about a year and a half, and then I found out about World of Warcraft, and that was the point where I was like, I gotta play this game because like compared to EverQuest, when I looked at like graphics and everything I'd seen and read everything, I was just like, this is gonna be the most amazing game ever. And when it came out, I didn't have a computer that could run it. I was still running the computer that couldn't even run EverQuest 1 or Warcraft 3. So my computer was absolute dog crap. But I had a friend, the same friend who got me into Diablo 2, had a computer that could run the game. So what we would do, and I actually look back on this with fond memories because it's just, I don't know, there's just something enjoyable about having a friend come over. He brought his computer, I paid for the account, and we would literally take 1 hour turns on a gnome warrior. And like after about a week's worth of playing, we were like level 8 because back in the day, World of Warcraft wasn't the quickest game to level in. It's not like today when you can get to level 10 in like 30 minutes.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that.
Yeah, so we did that for a while, and after a while, he just stopped taking his computer back and forth and left it at my house. So I played on that for a while until I finally got my grandparents to get me a computer of my own, and I've been playing World of Warcraft ever since. Like I started in January of 2005, and I still play up to today, even though I highly disagree with many of Blizzard's standards and a lot of their viewpoints on how the game should go comparatively. I'll complain a lot. I love the game to death, and I will probably continue to play World of Warcraft for a very long time. Um, Other than World of Warcraft, over the years I have been in several beta tests, nowhere near as much as Tana. I've beta tested Warhammer Online, Age of Reckoning. I've also beta tested games that probably no one here is going to even know about. Pirates of the Burning Sea, which was a pirate sailing based MMO, which I had a lot of hope for, but it fell short rather quickly. I don't even know if they're up anymore. I beta tested Mortal Online. I beta tested, gosh, so many games that I can't even think about. NDA's up on Elder Scrolls, so obviously, with our previous video, we've beta tested Elder Scrolls Online as like our most recent test. Other than that, lots of video games, lots of MMOs. MMOs being my favorite game just because of how massive the player base is. Aside from video games, I am a huge D&D nerd. I'm one of the few people who will actively pipe up and say, "Hey, I want to be the cleric." I Nobody wants to be the cleric, but honestly, I don't understand why. It is literally the most rewarding position you can get. You have all the power of your group as a cleric.
I like playing Necro Cleric. That's just me though.
But really, I'm just deep down a hardcore nerd, and I love talking about games. I can literally go on about the smallest details in a game for hours and hours and hours on end, because really, video games are a passion of mine, and so I'm really excited to start this podcast. We may not be very professional, we're really small, and even if we get one viewer who likes listening to our discussions, that's fine for me. This is mostly just me having a place to express my love for video games, discuss them, debate them, argue them, nitpick them, so on and so forth. So that's basically my background and the idea behind this podcast we're starting.
Should I give one for comic relief?
No, we don't care about guests. Go away.
No, we don't like you. You're just here because I don't know.
You're a viewer we have taken hostage.
There, we need.
Yep, pretty much. I'm sitting here, so close enough.
We need at least one. So, where'd my duct tape go?
No duct tape. That shit hurts.
Aw. uh, Anywho, I'm gonna pop in here with a bundle update. For those of you that do not know what bundles are, they are groups of games being sold by third party for pretty much ridiculous amounts off. A lot of them give a good portion of the proceeds to charity, and some to the developer, and then some to themselves to support future bundles. One of the biggest ones that most people will probably recognize is the Humble bundle. I'll have links to all these down in the. I'll have links to these down in the description. And currently going is the Humble Weekly Sale, which is PopCap this week, selling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games for $6. Peggle, Bejeweled 3, Bookworm Deluxe, Escape Rosecliff Island, Feeding Frenzy 2, Plants vs. Zombies, Peggle Knights, and Zuma's Revenge.
Okay, so just popping in here for a second. I also want to let you guys know that going from now, the 8th of March, to Monday, the 10th of March at 10 a.m. Pacific time, Rogue Legacy, which in my opinion is probably one of the best platformer dungeon crawler games I've played in a long time, is 66% off on Steam for $5.09. We will put a link to the store page in the description. And really, I cannot suggest this game enough. It is fantastic for just picking up and killing some time, breaking objects, killing monsters, fighting some pretty challenging bosses. It's definitely worth $5.09. So give it a look, and I really do not think that you're going to be dissatisfied with the experience you will find.
And now getting to our primary topic for this week's podcast. How does one define an MMO?
Honestly, you would think this is a topic of discussion that is just like, the answer's simple. But as of recently, and I even actually posted a topic on MMO Champion saying, okay, guys, so what do you actually consider an MMO? I gave a list of games including like Diablo 2, Diablo 3, Guild Wars 1, Guild Wars 2, World of Warcraft. I gave just a whole list of all kinds of different games. And shockingly enough, it was a bit surprising seeing some of the reactions because a lot of people were considering games that aren't actually by genre an MMO to be MMOs, which blew my mind just completely. Uh, Really, for a starting topic, this is actually something pretty big in my opinion, and I have a feeling we're going to go into a pretty in-depth discussion on what is and has been traditionally an MMO and where we are now. So, do you have anything you want to add?
Um, Not quite at this time.
Okay, so, oh, go ahead.
No, my finger just hit the button. You're good.
So, here's the thing. Like I said, we've both been playing MMOs for the longest time. Vel here, our guest, has also been playing uh, MMOs, I assume, for quite a while.
Um, Almost as long as I have, I think.
Not as long and not as hardcore, but I've been enjoying MMOs for a rather long time. Since before Lucklin on EverQuest.
Yeah, I think you got in Kunark? It's either Phillies or Kunark. So really
Sounds
early
about
on
right.
to really early on EverQuest, yeah.
Right.
Not
So,
quite as early with WoW, but again, I still enjoyed it immensely.
yeah, so all of us here have experience with MMOs, and I'm hoping we all have the basic understanding of what an MMO is. God, if that doesn't sound like the most pretentious statement this podcast. Here's the thing. By definition, for the longest period of time, an MMO comparatively to a normal multiplayer online game is massive, as the first M stands for, massively multiplayer online game. Now, most of these are RPGs. They don't have to be RPGs, but here's the point. An MMO-based game, genre-wise, to be officially considered an MMO, has to be set to allow for large, massive amounts of players to be playing at the same time in a persistent game world. Now, over time, as technology's gotten better, as internet connections have gotten better, non-MMO games have started to have bigger and bigger pools of players. Like, for example, let's look at the Battlefield series, which I believe goes up to battles of 40 people versus 40 people. So, you got 80 people in a match. That's a big amount of people, but it's still not an MMO because the world is not persistently running. It's really, the best way to describe it is instanced gameplay. You got a lobby, you get in the game, and you play that round, and then it resets. Like, if World of Warcraft were just battlegrounds with no persistent game world, with thousands of people running around at the same time, it really won't be an MMO. It's the same reason that a game like Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 are not technically MMOs. You've got thousands of people on the game, but it's not a persistent world where you can play with massive numbers of players at the same time. And that's the biggest thing. And as I've been seeing for a while now on MMO Champion of all places, it seems like nobody really quite grasps the idea that there's a difference between an MMO game and a non-MMO online game. And really, that's what we need to discuss here, because it just blows my mind. I don't know about you guys.
It's kind of mind-boggling to see people, I'm trying to think of the correct word for this, but it'd be, I guess, linking the same genre together of, World of Warcraft, EverQuest, games like that are technically MMOs in the same pool as games like Diablo 3, Path of Exile, and even League of Legends. People are saying League of Legends and Dota are MMOs.
Well, a mind-blowing one, I looked on YouTube. There was a channel that I actually commented on. They're like top 5 MMOs of 2013 or whatever. And the list was Team Fortress 2.
That is
does a channel...
That is not an MMO. I'm sorry.
No, it's not. How does a channel specifically devoted to MMOs not understand what an MMO is by definition and by genre?
I mean, I can kind of see where people are going with that, because the MMO, just taking the name for the namesake but not the meaning, massively multiplayer online. Yeah, there's 10,000 people playing the game. It's 10,000 people playing the game, 32 people at a time. That's not massive.
It's not massive, and it's not persistent. If an MMO were that loosely labeled, then any game that is online with any kind of lobby would be considered an MMO, which is absolutely 100% not true.
Yeah, I mean, you could go all the way back to, like, Warcraft 2, back when the original BattleNet, that had a lobby, that had, thousands of people playing online when they added the BattleNet patch to it.
Or you could go as far as to say Minecraft, or even some of the newer Halo games.
Yeah, really. Those are not MMOs. Those are completely separate genres.
Well, I want to play devil's advocate here. Minecraft, you're right. It's not designed to be an MMO. It's a multiplayer sandbox experience. But
Yeah.
it wasn't really designed for an MMO. But for example, if you look at a big server like anyone here knows who Jesse Cox is and Shabuzi is, they have their own server which frequently gets up to 250 players all playing at the same time in a persistent server world. Uh, the game itself is not an MMO by genre, but then you look at something like that and really being with this type of discussion, how would you label a game that may not have been intended to be an MMO, but through servers, like big powerful servers paid by big groups with enough income to support it, and turn it into an MMO? What would you really consider Minecraft? Because go ahead.
Percentage based, personally. True, Minecraft has a number of servers. I myself have played on a couple that had about 1,000 players persistently, but through the percentages, there are so many more rooms that are just 32 player max, or the one I'm currently on, Ep.1, is a 40 player max server, and that's where the majority lies, and I'd have to say you'd have to follow the percentages on that one.
So basically, because the majority of servers aren't massive, then it's safe to say that you can't classify it as a massive game because most can't support a big number like Shibuzi, for example.
Well, yes, I mean, if we were to go with what some people are doing that aren't quite in the same percentages, we could say, even though it's not within Sony's term of agreement, that private EverQuest servers, we could say that by our definition, those do not meet MMO standards. Because they're not massive if they're a private network of a small number of people.
I would probably have to go with whatever's official. Because, I mean, if, say, somebody got access to making their own Diablo 3 server, they could push up the maximum player count over 1,000 if they wanted to, and that would technically classify it as an MMO if they had someone keeping the world persistent.
Oh my god, I don't even want to know what like your freaking interface would look like.
I don't know, but I can just imagine, and no. But on this, I would probably have to go with whatever is officially launched by the company that produced it.
This is fantastic, I just want to say, is that really we have three unique viewpoints over what classifies an MMO, so we're seeing it from multiple angles. You're looking at more of the what is defined by the creators, what is officially what the game is officially labeled as its genre. I'm looking at exactly how many players it's capable of supporting, and if it's capable of being considered an MMO. And Vel is looking at it as a more whole and looking at percentages. I just like the fact that we've got three different viewpoints on it, and we can really get into a good discussion on this.
It's going to lead for some interesting topics. Because you look at, like Vel said, you look at Minecraft and you see these servers that he plays on that have, 1,000 players. If you look at like games like EverQuest or Warhammer Online before it got shut down, their entire server populations were capping at maybe 10,000. I mean, that's still classified under an MMO, but you get 10 servers like the ones he plays on sometimes, that's an MMO. But is it really because that's what the players modded it to be or could support it to be, or is that really because that's what the game should be classified under?
I have a hard time classifying anything under the category of MMO if it has a single player. I mean, obviously that's probably not the best way to classify it, but I just see a bit of a problem there if it's designed to originally be in single player. And I want to say that one thing that is important to me, at least, for something to be an MMO is groupability.
You know, that actually brings up one thing I did want to discuss, something that happened very, very recently, actually. You were mentioning about the single player experience, and I think this is something to really pay mind to because, believe it or not, I saw someone say this is an MMO, which I totally disagree. The game is not an MMO. It's obvious it's not an MMO to anyone who God, I am going to sound like the most condescending, like cynical asshole on this podcast, but anyone with a working frontal lobe would be able to go, this game's not an MMO.
I can't wait.
Twitch plays Pokemon. Now, you've got a game, Pokemon, which is a single player game. It's the original, and you could link it up and trade and battle, but it's a single player game. Now, Twitch recently rigged up some emulation software to the chat room where literally tens of thousands of players were inputting command into the game simultaneously at the same time, which created chaos, but experience-wise, that was thousands of players playing at the same time in a persistent game. Now, I would not declare that as an MMO, but I've actually seen several people now say that is an MMO experience and that can be classified as an MMO, which, again, this is just blowing my mind because obviously neither of you would consider that an MMO, right?
No. No, I would.
Of course not.
I would consider that someone doing a single player game in a massive scale. That's the same thing as throwing 10,000 people in a concert hall and saying, here, play this game. That's now an MMO.
I mean, there are Facebook games that have a persistent world that you interact with other people. Do we want to call those MMOs now? I'm not up for that.
Introducing from PopCap, Peggle the MMO.
Yeah. Introducing from Zynga, Mafia Wars 33.
Now you can watch them break the kneecaps.
Yeah, instead of just clicking a button and going, here, I'm going to spam my friends with, I just hit somebody with a car. Yeah, no, that's again, those are just time passers. Those aren't MMOs. If you really want to classify that as having a persistent world, it's literally just a single player game where you harass other players. I mean, you could really say I'm getting kind of biased on that because it's not a good game
Annoying.
in the beginning, but yeah, annoying. But really, we're looking for the core definition of an MMO.
Well, how about this one then? A while back, a game came out called Mag. It was one of the first of its type shooter game that had a massive, absolutely massive scale of players. I believe that the player cap per map was 256 players, which back at the time, given the technology, which it's not that insanely old, but still 256 players playing on a map simultaneously, that's a lot for a first-person shooter. What would your opinions be on that game? Would you define that technically as an MMO experience because given the time frame in which it came out, it was massive. There's just a bunch of people in the same area at the same time, but it did lack the persistency of the world, I believe.
Well, for me, another question would be, is there grouping? Is there stuff that you do together, or is it just kind of a loose association of people?
As far as I'm aware, it is a game where you join in, you're assigned to a team. So there, out of the 256 players, half is on one team, half is on another team. Uh, Really, it's your standard objective-based. Uh, think Battlefield, but on a grand, massive scale.
If there's no persistency outside of that match, then I don't think I could classify that as an MMO. There's a massive scale of players, yes. I don't know when it came out, but 256 players. I mean, you look at, what is it, PlanetSide 2, you've got 500 versus 500 on the same map. That one, however, if pushed, I could consider that an MMO because technically the maps themselves are permanently persistent. It's just you pick what area you're going to have to defend.
I believe, and it's been a long time since I played as well. I believe, isn't there also grouping in that game?
In PlanetSide 2? Yes.
Planet.
There's also clan system. There's also persistent gearing system. It's basically an MMORPG shooter.
Yeah, I would technically consider that an MMO because, like I said, one, it's got massive, massive numbers of players because you've got a three-way faction war with, what was it, like 500 on each team. So
Yeah.
that's an absolutely massive number of players on three persistent separate maps that are constantly going on. I would definitely consider that to be an MMO FPS, but going back to MAG, the game I originally stated, which came out way before PlanetSide 2, like way, way, way before. In fact, let me pull up when that came out, and I'd like to hear Vel's thoughts on this actually.
Let's see, MAG video game for, I'm assuming PlayStation 3?
Yes.
North American release January 26, 2010.
Wow. It's not as... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm unfamiliar with the game, but from what it sounds, there is a persistent world which meets our criterion there. Did you say this one has the grouping in clan, or was that a different one? I didn't catch that.
Oh,
according to
MAG?
Yeah, according to their Wikipedia article, because that's the only link I clicked that seems to work, it does have a, let's see, clan deploy. Included in version 2.0, an update to MAG added a clanning system where you can clan deploy any players that are currently online.
That makes it a little closer, in my opinion, to being an MMO. Again, I'm not familiar enough to really make a distinction. But I'd say it's really one up for debate.
I would classify it under the same thing I'd put Battlefield, because Battlefield has a clanning system, Halo has a clanning, I think the newest Halo has a clanning system. What's the other one? Call of Duty has a clanning system, but they're still all per match based. There's no persistence other than possibly, achievements and personal upgrades.
I personally would not consider an MMO. MAG. PlanetSide 2 I definitely consider an MMO, but MAG, it's got the size. The size is there. It's massive. But it's lacking the persistency of the game world, which to me really puts it as just a large-scale first-person shooter. It's at the same time, it's hard to define it because with an RPG, a massively multiplayer RPG, you need the persistent world. But the more I think about it, for a first-person shooter, how important is the persistent world? PlanetSide 2 has the persistent world. I 100% already consider that an MMO. For MAG, being back in 2010, for the size of the game, something that was intentional in design, comparatively to games which at max had like 40 versus 40, going to 256 players, which is, I believe, 128 versus 128, is grand in scale, but is it enough to technically label it an MMO?
I would vote 0. No. No.
You would vote 0. Well, I'll vote 3.
I would say no, it does not. It lacks the core functionality of an MMO, which is persistence.
I got to agree on that.
It may be massive, and this is the point we're getting at, guys. Just because a game's massive, unless it has those key features, it's and this is really hard to say because, like I said, keyword in an MMO is massive. The game had massive, but it was still instanced, and that's my biggest fault with it, is that because it's not persistence, because it's most of the time being in a lobby of some kind until you actually get into the game, which can be won and reset, I wouldn't really consider that to be an official MMO by definition. It's massive, but it's not. It doesn't have the other features that are required to be an MMO, like say PlanetSide being the best direct comparison, because that's also a first-person shooter with large numbers of players playing at the same time. But unlike MAG, it's got persistency on its side. It's a battle that's continually going on and not being reset. And I think that right there is one of the key points of being a MMO, is having persistency, scale, and I guess really those are the two big points.
Okay, so I can already see, I can already foresee a couple of possible comments here. Instancing. A lot of the current MMOs, like EverQuest added it with, I think, Depths of Dark Hollow. Or, no, before that.
Lost Dungeons of Norath,
Yeah.
I know they had it then.
Yeah. They added it in LDON, Lost Dungeons of Norath. They continued it in Depths of Dark Hollow, and they're continuing it now again with more expansions. And then you've got World of Warcraft with their instance dungeons. You got Guild Wars 2 with its instanced questings. Big difference between, you sit in a lobby and go into an instanced match like you would with Battlefield or League of Legends.
Yeah, the core game is not instanced. The core game itself, you're out there amongst other players. There are instanced portions, but not the core of it.
Yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
Here's a counter argument to that. I don't consider the original Guild Wars to be an MMO, because outside of the towns, it is not massive, it's not persistent. But if you go in the towns, you can see literally hundreds of other players all running around. My view on something like that is that it is really a visual lobby. What would you consider that? Because while yes, it's very limited and most of the game is instanced, you do have those very few sections of the game, the towns, which are not instanced. So would Guild Wars 1, in your personal opinion, fit as an MMO by your definition?
If they had done one more thing that they had promised from the beginning of Guild Wars 1, it would. But because they didn't, I do not consider it. They promised persistent, large-scale battles. Instead, they did like 5v5, 10v10, and 20v20 battlegrounds. Instanced battlegrounds. Everything outside the lobby was instanced. And I call it a lobby, not a town, because that's literally what it is. It's a spot. I think there were 5 at the end of the game that you could 5 non-instanced zones out of the 700 something that you could actually see other players that were not in your party. I agree with you. It's a visual lobby. And to take that one step further, Path of Exile.
I personally get so frustrated because Path of Exile is obviously now a very popular game because a lot of the old hardcore Diablo fans looked at it and went, "This is exactly what we want." You know, different games for different people. Some people like Diablo 3. Some people like Torchfire,
Torchlight.
Torchlight. I have
Close enough.
actually still not played. I have still not played Torchlight 2. I've got my Steam library. It's begging me to play it, but I haven't actually sat down and played it. Um, you know, some people like Diablo 3, some people like some people like Diablo 3, some people like Torchlight, some people like Path of Exiles, you know, different games for different people. Here's the thing. When it comes down to it, it kind of falls in the same category as Guild Wars. It's not really an MMO. You can't technically define it as an MMO because you're not playing in a persistent world with literally hundreds or thousands of people at the exact same time. You're doing a lot of instancing, which is the biggest issue. And while games like WoW and many modern MMOs have instancing, here's the thing: there's an overworld with content in it. It's not just a town where you can like, oh hey, look, there's somebody, his armor's neat, let's trade. It's
Yeah.
actually a persistent gameplay world where you can interact with thousands of people. There's just because it's got instances doesn't mean it's not an MMO, but on the same standard, you have to look at the other side of the spectrum with games like Guild Wars and Path of Exile, which really, when you look at it, are not MMOs.
Yeah, when the instancing becomes a feature for enjoyment, meaning it gives you access to things that other players can't disrupt you from, that's okay. When instancing becomes the entire core functionality of the game and you cannot interact with people outside your party or whatever without being in some sort of lobby, which is basically what the towns in Path of Exile and Guild Wars 1 are, that that's not an MMO.
So are we saying it's back down to the percentages again?
Really, it could be. I mean, you look at Path of Exile and you see, 40,000 people playing. Yeah, if that were a wholly persistent world, maybe with a little bit of instancing here and there for maybe like a storyline or something, I could see that. But with 30 or 40,000 people playing, 1 to 6 or whatever players at a time in their own instanced worlds, no.
Another thing I'd like to bring up, sorry for the being out of order, but as I'm currently playing Minecraft for the PC, I was reminded that on the Xbox, one could not really define Minecraft as an MMO because it all it has is those small person lobbies.
Yeah, that that brings up, cross-platform. If the game is built for one system and can be hacked to allow massive players, does the cross-platform version allow it as well? Which also brings it back into the what was the original developer intending?
That also brings up the discussion, though, of can you really go off of that? Is that a legitimate reasoning? Because while yes, Minecraft was developed, not to be an MMO. It wasn't built with that in mind. Although he had planned for multiplayer from the start, he had always wanted like other people to be able to play. Can you really say that? Because in the planning stages, I'm sure it was like other people will be able to play with you, but the size of servers, which they get massive. I think the server on Zach's computer is well over a terabyte just from our exploring. Imagining 1,000 people exploring at the same time, the requirements for the server and everything to run smoothly, it was never intended to be that way, even though players make it that way. But and let's just pretend for a moment that Minecraft was intended to have that massive scale. But then they port it to the console, and due to console limitations, they had to strip it. Now, if the original Minecraft were an MMO, and was capable of being an MMO, but because of console restrictions when they pour it over, it was stripped down to a single-player game, really, what effect does the non-original platform have on deciding the genre of the original game? Is it really something we can link the two together and say, this is one half, this is another half, or is it something we have to look at and go, these are actually two completely different games?
Well, I could bring up two sides of this. The first side is technically they are the same game. The original core game is the same. Same name, same function, same look, same feel, same mechanics. Now, on the other hand, is something like EverQuest Original versus EverQuest Online Adventures considered the same game. Yes, they're both MMOs, but I'm using it as a reference. Because technically, if you look at it, outside of music and basic background lore, they're completely different games.
You cheater. I frickin' armed you with that.
Well, another point I want to bring up is EVE Online is an MMO. What about its PlayStation sister, if you want to call it that, Dust?
That's actually something I really wanted to bring up because that's a fascinating point. Because both games, if I know this right, if my information is correct, I'm not the EVE guy here. You guys are the EVE people. I can't get into playing Excel online.
Spreadsheets in space.
They are interconnected, Dust and EVE. There's some form of interconnection going on between the games. EVE is an MMO, and is Dust is connected to that in some way, but is Dust persistent? How does that work? Because I'm actually really interested in hearing about this.
Dust is quasi-persistent. Technically, it's a technically at the core of the game itself, not including the before they linked it to the Tranquility server, it was essentially Halo with EVE setup. But what they did to it is they took, instead of, you just click a random game, you get thrown into a random map, you get, whatever. What you do is you take over planets in EVE. So let's say, outside of the training maps, because those, I don't think I could really count training maps. What you do is you say, I want to fight on this faction's side. You get thrown into faction warfare in the Tranquility server, because they're both run on the same server. The players in EVE, flying the ships, can interact with you. What you're essentially doing is helping conquer a planet and system. So what you're accomplishing in Dust is persistent in EVE.
So, what would your opinion be? Like, it's really an interesting, and this is why I like how technology is advanced, because now we've got the ability to do this, where you've got two completely separate games that are interconnected. One being a persistent space MMO, one being a first-person shooter that are somewhat connected. It's just I really, because I have no experience at all with Dust and I have minimum experience with Eve, I can't really make a statement here. It would not be fair to make one. This is really something that I'm interested in hearing, like concrete, solid, final, factual. Like, what do you and Vel consider on the topic?
Yeah, that's a very good question because the core game by itself, if it was not attached to Eve, I would say it's just CCP's version of a Halo clone. A really well done one. I like the mechanics better, but that's essentially what it is. It's, the next CCP's version of Call of Duty, Halo, or Battlefield. But
I think the connectivity with the Eve servers does give it that persistent world that we're really looking at. It's not a persistent world under its own title, but at the same time, it is a persistent world. I would say enough to fit our definitions of an MMO.
I I kind of agree. I agree that the persistency of it is there. It is there. If you return to that planet after the match is over, it's still decimated. It's still conquered. All the maps are persistent up to that until someone else tries to take the map over again, and you have to defend it. The fact that everything you obtain in the game is persistent, so you can, kill someone, walk up and loot their shit and take it, or you get, credits and buy more shit. I would probably have to throw it under the same blanket as PlanetSide 2, because that's essentially what it is.
What about you, Vel? What's your opinion on this matter?
I've not had much experience with it personally, other than reading a wiki article, and the discussion here, of course. But it does have the persistent world we're looking for. It does have the persistent achievements, and I believe it's going to have some sort of grouping, though
Yeah,
it lacks quests, which really makes me wonder if we should have included that, or maybe that's just my own personal preference for what I enjoy in an MMO, as opposed to what the definition is. But I'm not seeing anything here that classifies it as not an MMO, but I'm not sure that gives us enough of a stamp to truly call Dust itself an MMO.
Well, it does have grouping because you can join a corporation, an alliance. Technically, that's how you get the best stuff: is you join an alliance and you defend faction warfare. It does have crafting. It does have its own monetary system. It does basically everything that an MMO needs. It even has like what you said. It has quests. It says, you need to defend this. You need to attack this. It has, I don't know. I would throw it under the same blanket as PlanetSide 2 because it is a persistent world. It does have the grouping. It does have persistent after effect, and it is massive. I mean, it doesn't have the giant player base that Battlefield has, which I don't know why, because it's a free game. You just download it on your PS3 and go. But I would classify it as an MMO. Yes.
I do not personally have the experience with PlanetSide, but all this talk is just making me wish I could play Dust all the more.
Get a PS3.
Now,
That's the problem.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. You mentioned quests. Objectives
Yes.
I can understand, but actual quests, this brings into a sub-discussion within this discussion. Yeah, discussion. I did it again. Damn it.
I'm nom words.
This brings up a sub-discussion inside of our current discussion. The separation of MMO and MMORPG. Because really, MMO is I don't know which one you'd consider the subgenre, because RPG is its own genre. MMO turns the RPG into a massive experience. How important are quests in an MMO in general compared to in an MMORPG, wherein role-playing games is all about the quest, the experience. You know, you're going through this game, you're playing the role of this character and embarking on epic journeys, performing these tasks to more often than not save the world. But how do you separate an MMO from an MMORPG specifically?
Well, I'd say that the quests are essential in the RPG, but the MMO, that one's up for debate.
Yeah, I'm kind of on that fence, but I would say to classify it as an MMORPG, you would need the core essentials of an RPG thrown in as well. So I would say if it's an MMO, but it could also be played as a solo RPG, then I could dig it.
Well, the question here was, were we trying to define MMORPG or just MMOs in general? And is there even a major difference? What would we consider MMOs that do not have RPG elements? Enough RPG elements to be considered an RPG, I should say.
I'll take this one. PlanetSide 2 is a good comparison to, let's say, EverQuest. EverQuest is your standard MMORPG, and really one of the big ones that created this genre that we love so much. EverQuest has very many RPG staples. You know, you've got stats. Your character actively progresses. He gets stronger. He learns new powers. He learns new abilities. Learns new tactics. He gets better equipment. He's going on this predefined journey inside a pretty open world. Then you look at PlanetSide 2, which is you are a soldier. You are not the grand savior of the world. You are one of the many cogs in the war machine. You don't personally really progress compared to a RPG which has stat points and abilities and stuff like that. You do get equipment upgrades, but does equipment really... is that enough to define it as an RPG? In my mind, no. PlanetSide is an MMO FPS. Primarily, it's a first-person shooter. It has all the specifications that make it a first-person shooter, but it's an MMO. Whereas EverQuest is an RPG. It's got all the details and specifications that make it an RPG, but it's massive. It's a persistent open world. And so that's an MMORPG. That's how I differentiate them, is because if you were to look at a game like Dust, or for example, PlanetSide 2, they lack many of the requirements for an RPG, and as such, they would be MMO FPSs, right?
PlanetSide 2, yes, I would throw that as an MMO FPS. Dust, I would actually throw that under MMORPG more than FPS. I would say it's more of an MMORPG FPS, because it's, at the core, an FPS, but also you do actually get stat points. You do actually get to spend skill points. Your character progresses. It takes... Currently, nobody has hit the maximum skill point. They probably won't for another couple of years. It's basically Eve thrown into an FPS.
My God, could you imagine going around saying that? Hi, I play a game called Dust. It's an MMO RPG FPS.
Yeah, good luck.
I just want to bring into the discussion. Have you guys heard of a game called Freelancer?
I sounds familiar, but freelancer is kind of a common word, so it may just not be ringing any bells.
Um, Long story short, it's a spaceship game which I'm while I've played Eve before, I'm not generally too into myself. That was more my brother's thing. However, I was wondering if you guys were familiar enough with it to discuss it because it does have a persistent world. However, it does have a persistent world, it has quests and the like, but how massive are we talking for a MMO? Because massive's in the name. How massive do we want to call it?
I That brings up an entirely different point of when does it get considered massive? At
I
what
think
point?
that now we're. I think that really defines on the technology of the time. Because massive 10, 15 years ago and massive now are way, like two way radically different comparisons.
Is that only because of the technology, though, or because the fact that the gamer base has grown dramatically from what people saw as nerds living in their mother's basement to everybody, even uh, jocks that I've talked to in high school, they knew what WoW was, and a number of them have played it.
Now, see, I see where you're going with that, and actually, I know several like people who weren't the nerdy kind of people, and they saw World of Warcraft, and at first they're like, "What's this?" And they start playing, and they're like, "Oh man, this is awesome." But really, I think it does come down to both. The overall subscription base is not really what I'd focus on. I'd focus on the capabilities of the server itself. So, for instance, look at Guild Wars 2. Look at the world versus world in that game and how many players you had there. That was a lot. That was a lot of people in one area in Guild Wars 2. Look at Warhammer Online, which me and Tana played very frequently. Uh, in that game, there were massive scale battles, like massive. Look at World of Warcraft. The battle between Terran Mill and South Shore, which I was like level 29. I was stuck in the middle of that game, my ass kicked. But
Yeah,
really,
back in those days, that was that was actually before they actually included battlegrounds. They included battlegrounds to alleviate that kind of stress on their servers.
and those battles back then, while we look back and we go, man, that was a lot of people, that was probably a common battle of Terran Mill. Back then, in the day when they naturally occurred, was probably around 100, maybe 125 players on a combination of both sides. It's not as massive as people really like to envision it being. It wasn't. It was bigger than Alterac Valley,
Yeah.
but not by a dramatic amount. Now look at Guild War, or excuse me, uh, Elder Scrolls Online. There we go. I knew I'd get it. Look at Elder Scrolls Online. Look at how many hundreds.
I can't wait to.
Yeah. I don't think he got to really enjoy ESO beta.
That's okay. He can sit in the corner like the viewer he is. Uh, Look at how many hundreds of people are taking part in massive, massive group battles, which when you looked at the map, we weren't just in one of many conflicts going on all around the map. The number of players we were fighting, and we were fighting alongside, dwarfs, absolutely dwarfs stuff like the Battle of Terran Mill and Alterac Valley, which back then, back in 2005, I believe it came out 2005, 2006, was considered something groundbreaking, something just so massive in comparison because it had not been done on such a large scale. But if you were to look at that now, 40 versus 40, even in non-MMO games, is really not an achievement anymore.
Yeah, it really
And just
isn't.
imagine that's beta. I am so jelly right now.
Yeah,
I want to play.
that was a limited invite beta. Basically, the people they wanted to invite, and then I think it was like one or two friend codes each, and not everybody used all those friend codes. So I'd say probably at most between the channeled server and adding the um was Tamriel channeled? I can't remember.
Here's how Tamriel worked. There were multiple servers, but they weren't automatic like the main overworld. You had a list that you chose
Oh,
from.
that's right.
So
That's right. Now I remember. Yeah. So we were on one shard of, I think there were like 30 in the list. And we were fighting a battle, and I really wish OBS would uh I really wish ESO didn't have problems, because that whole freezing thing making Open Broadcaster crash. I
okay,
really wish I could have gotten that on recorded for the stream, because it was like 400 versus 400 at one fort. And there were 3 or 4 forts being attacked at the same time.
it was massive. And here's the thing: technology-wise, that was built with that massiveness in mind, and it was set up in a way that you gotta remember, this game's not optimized yet. It's not optimized fully for release, which is sad seeing as we've got 1 month to go. It's still so poorly optimized. It was running smoothly. The game was built for those massive numbers. So, and that was my big point. What we considered massive back then, really, by technology standards, is that considered massive anymore?
No, no, it's not. We would, if we were to define a previous year game, we would have to look up what year it was released and what year said comparison point was added in. So if we're considering like Battlegrounds part of the massive scale of WoW, we would have to think, okay, what was the technology like back in 2005? And to be honest, 40v40 was, for WoW's standpoint and that technology standpoint, that was pretty damn big. I mean,
Yeah,
most shooters capped out at maybe 16v16, and if they were the um, leaders in their field, it might have been 32v32. I think in that day, um, let's see, when did this come out? It came out in. Oh, you're not going to tell me on the back of the box, are you? When on the disc, right here. So, 2002 was the release date of the first Battlefield, Battlefield 1942. That is one of 2 Battlefield games that I own, because that was the good one. But that only supported 32v32, and that was considered massive scale back then.
yeah, and I mean, really, Alterac Valley's instanced. World of Warcraft maybe an MMO, but Alterac Valley's instanced. Like I said, the
Yeah.
real big comparison was the Battle of Terran Mill, which wasn't instanced, but really, and a lot of people want to romanticize this whole like it was so big and so amazing. There were hundreds. No, there weren't. That area, the distance between Terra Mill and South Shore was tiny. The amount of people there, yeah, it was big, but was nowhere near like hundreds of players at the same time. You had about roughly 100, 120 max. And those people were out there because they were waiting for their queues for Alterac Valley.
Yeah. Or they were out there because they just wanted to fuck around. Like, I'm gonna go take on the guards at South Shore. Yeah! And then that person would piss someone off because that person was trying to do a quest, and then he'd go get his main and kick the shit out of the other guy that's attacking the guards, and then that would just start an entire corp that would start a guild war, and then someone would advertise in town, hey, South Shore is under attack, and then people would fly in, and it would just start a clusterfuck. But again, at most, there might have been 120 people.
Reminds me of a lot of the Ruthless Soldier stuff in WoW.
Pretty much, yeah.
Another thing to remember about back then, and this is something I remember so fuzzy because it was so long ago. I don't even remember how much of a fact this was, but I'm pretty sure that back in vanilla, there wasn't just local defense. There was global defense. You knew anywhere in the game world where it was being attacked. So if Terran Mill was attacked and people saw it, you can damn well bet people were heading to Terran Mill. If Stormwind was under attack, that was... Actually, wasn't Ironforge the main city back in vanilla?
Yep, because it was the only city with a auction house on the Alliance.
Yeah, that's right. It's just we're kind of sidetracking and starting to get into more of a WoW discussion. But the point is, what's considered massive today is not considered what was massive back then. Like, World of Warcraft can't even handle, at times, massive amounts of players. Because if you look at a streamer like Swifty, who's very popular and gathers tons of people together sometimes for World versus World events, he has crashed the servers. Not years ago, and recently, like the last year, he has gotten so many people that's crashed the servers because the servers weren't built specifically to handle that massive amount of players in one area. It's just too much.
This brings up another question, though. We say that it's not comparable because of the difference in technology. I have to wonder, what does that mean, though, for people who are going back and playing the game back from the past? A game that would once have been considered an MMO because of its massive scale at the time. What of somebody going back and playing it with today's technology? Would it still be considered an MMO or just an interesting pastime?
Yes, and I'll say it like this because the way I view it is that it's a club. There's a barrier to entry. So 10 years ago, like let's look at say I don't know, some kind of regal refined club. It's like, oh, you want to get a membership? It's like so much money. Oh, you want to be defined as an MMO? It requires this. As time goes on and as technology gets better and stronger, the barrier to entry I feel raises. But because a game was already an MMO, it's aged. I don't think that's really something that gets redefined. I think back then it was an MMO and it was grandfathered in because at its time, at its peak and at its prime, it was massive for its time. And I think that that's something that doesn't get lost with age.
I completely agree with that. If it was an MMO
Indeed.
for its time, it should still be considered an MMO because that's what it was. I mean, if you look at, I don't know, if you look at EverQuest and say it's not an MMO anymore because it's, it didn't really age well. I mean, you get 1,000 people in the same zone, even with computers like mine, Vel's, and even yours, Kelly. If you go into the guild
Not
lobby,
1,000. It takes about 150 people in one zone, and it'll really start to slow down. In fact, anymore, people have been pulling so many mobs that it'll lag the zone to the point where they'll run 10 feet away from a mob, and they can go make a sandwich by the time the mob is done rubber banding.
yeah,
I think there are more active players in a game like... I'd have to see numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were more active players in a game like Rift than in EverQuest nowadays.
I really wouldn't doubt it. I personally didn't like Rift, but that's just because most of the beta for Rift was direct copy from WoW. But yeah, I mean, you walk into the guild lobby on a computer like mine or Vel's, you're going back to the old school days where you open up the map, stare at the ground, and use the map to navigate. Because if you look up, you're freezing. 2 GB GTX 760, and it will still dead stop if you're not looking at the map and at the ground.
Going back to when we started this podcast a while back, I talked about my history in MMOs and how I lacked a computer to play World of Warcraft. I ended up using my friend's computer, which was a Dell. It ran World of Warcraft back then, but just like you were saying with EverQuest, in order for me to even consider going into Ironforge, which was like a PowerPoint presentation for my computer back then, I had to stare at the ground the entire time with minimum settings.
Yep. Stare at the ground and hope to God you don't fall in the center pit thing.
Oh God.
I'm walking towards the bank. Why am I in the pit? Damn it.
Yeah.
I've totally never done that.
No, never.
But really, we've been going on for a while, and we've had a lot of discussion over what is an MMO by definition, by genre, by technology. Really, if you were to state an MMO simply in a few sentences, what would you say defines as a genre an MMO based game?
A lot of people in the same persistent world, well, the capability to run a lot of people in the same persistent world stably without reset. So the world can't be instanced. There can be, world events that can reset the world, but it's really tough. But just by thinking, you can tell what an MMO is and isn't. So, does it have a persistent world? Does it have the capability to run, a decently large amount of people in that same persistent world? Shards acceptable.
Hold on, do we want to talk about capabilities or how many people actually have been on it? Because I'm sure there have been a number of games.
Capabilities.
I don't know any right now, but I'm sure there have been a number of games that have had the server power, but not the player base to run games like that.
That is a very fair point.
I would probably go by capabilities because, I mean, if you make an MMO and people don't play it, it's still an MMO by definition of genre, developer intent, and basically just this is what this game is supposed to be. Whether the people like it and play it is a completely different matter.
See, this is interesting to me because really, when I suggested we do this discussion, my thought was it's going to be open close. It was going to be this is an MMO, it's plain as day, and really we've gotten to the point where there is so many different factors to consider that I'm personally having a really hard time trying to think of how I can word what exactly defines an MMO in a couple of sentences.
It all depends on what your definition of is.
Yeah, pretty much. So I'm gonna go with has a persistent world, has a persistent player base. By that I mean can host a very large amount of players, and
Can see progress?
yeah, can see not just visual but mechanical progress. Your character persists in the world, makes an impact. I mean, even if it's just, you helped out in a world event, that world is still persistent, so you're helping out in that world event to persist. Or persist. Um, Because if you go into character progression, I would say that would be falling under the lines of an RPG. So really, games that are room-based aren't. Games that are single world persistent based are.
I've got to agree with Tana on that one. It's totally about the percentages, really. Of course, you are going to have some instances. You are going to have, even in non-MMOs, you're going to have some lobby aspects that may or may not have graphics that are persistent. However, if the majority of the game is a lobby, or sorry, if the majority of the game is an instance, then you're not an MMO.
You can have.
I would have to say. Oh, go ahead.
You can have all the players in the world. You could have a game that rivals WoW at its peak. 14, 15 million players. But if they're all playing in 1 to 8 player games, that's not an MMO. That's a single player game with multiplayer capabilities.
How many people played Age of Empires after all?
Millions. I mean, there's still a lobby for AoE. There's still an active player-run lobby for AoE 2 with hundreds of thousands of players still playing it. But that's not MMO.
And we're getting short on time, and as you say that makes me want to bring up Age of Empires Online. Maybe we can do a follow-up discussion on that on a later date. But for now, my points that I would stress would be persistency, scale with a variable number of players dependent on the technology restraints of that time, and interactivity. If you've got persistence and you've got players, but it's not persistent on the grand scale, it's not an MMO. If you've got the players, it's got to be all those factors. It's got to be persistent. It's got to be massive. You got to have massive amounts of players able to interact on the majority of the game together. That really is what defines an MMO for me, is massive scale persistent.
Yep.
I can agree with that.
And with that, we are out of time for the first episode of the Dwarven Discussions podcast. I thank you all for listening. Please, feedback. As we said in our Elder Scrolls video, negative criticism is a good thing. Help us to be better. Tell us your opinion. What do you think? Discuss MMOs with us. Continue the discussion in the chat. What you personally feel an MMO is, and what you feel defines an MMO. I personally would be interested in reading what your opinions are. Like, favorite,
Opinions
subscribe.
and why.
Yeah.
Yes, and why. Don't just say you're wrong, please. Someone's going to do that now just to spite me.
Probably.
Make a discussion. There's nothing wrong with going into detail why you feel what you feel. Just simply saying that you feel because, I think you're wrong because I think you're wrong. That really, take part in the discussion, because we welcome it. We welcome active discussion on the topic. But like, favorite, subscribe, tell your friends, tell us what you think. So until next time, this is Kelly. Catch you guys later.
Tana, I'm out.
Have fun, y'all.